any number of people. And we decided that we would launch this project where we could have what we call Ngoma, which is Kiswahili, East African for drum. And so we are going to have each month on the third Monday of the month, we have these dialogues. And last year we had an amazing array of presenters and speakers, and it's no different this year. We're so excited to have our kickoff speaker, who is renowned and is going to discuss a very interesting topic. So again, let me tell you how this works. We're excited. Dr. Wyse, do you want to say hello or anything? I just want to give you the opportunity to say hi, just in case you want to jump on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first installment of our Ngoma series for this school year. Thank you all for coming.
Excellent. And I'm just going to kick just some quick shouts and thanks to the Dean, Dr. David Lehman, and in the Dean's office as well, Nicole Rayfield. So, because without them, we wouldn't be able to do this, and it's truly their support, and it's been a group project. So thank you. I'm going to introduce the first speaker in the series. Typically what we do is our presenter will speak for about 25 minutes-ish or so, and then we really open it up to dialogue. Some people stick them in the chat. Some people raise their hand. We try to track it and follow it, and hopefully we can get to all of them. And so without any further ado, we're going to kick off. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and she is Dr. Khadijah Miller. She is a professor of interdisciplinary studies and the dean of the Robert C. Nussbaum Honors College at Norfolk State University in Virginia. She is the former chair of the Department of History and Interdisciplinary Studies, where she led the university's first fully online undergraduate degree program. She spearheaded the development of the university's first minor in Africana Studies, along with such courses as The Black Woman and Black Lives Matter. As an academician, she studies, develops, implements curricular activities that support student success, interest, and preparation for post-college collegiate pursuits. She has a BA in print journalism from New York University, a master's and PhD in African and African American studies from the Temple University. I should note, the first PhD program of its kind in the universe. Her research interests and studies include Black womanhood, girlhood, and motherhood. She is a Virginia gubernatorial appointee to the Task Force for the Identification of the History of Formerly Enslaved African Americans in Virginia. She also serves as vice president of the Association for Interdisciplinary Studies and a board member of the ACE Women's Virginia Network. We are absolutely honored, thrilled, and excited to have her as our kickoff speaker this year. And I say to her, Hotep, and welcome.
Hotep, and thank you, Asante Sana. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to dialogue with you, and that is what I plan to do. I'm gonna share my screen. We tested this earlier. Hopefully everyone can see. Okay, thank you. I see Dr. Wyse nodding. Thank you. Okay, so, greetings and thanks. I'm really excited to share in this conversation. This is a conversation I guess I've been having for over 20 years. This is work that started with my dissertation more than 20 years ago at Temple University. And I felt pulled to the work of Black women organized formally and informally. And so I just like to share that with all of you. I also want to say that I feel a connection to Widener. Although I did my graduate work at Temple, I adjunct at Westchester and Drexel Universities, and I headed the Women's Studies program at Rosemont College. So I do have some Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, connection, not to mention that that's where I met my husband, but that's for another conversation. But so I'm happy to share with everyone in Widener in Pennsylvania. I would be remiss if I did not begin with gratitude to those who've come before us and who have led the way. Gratitude to Dr. Cooper and Dr. Wyse and the administration at Widener for us to hold this conversation, and definitely gratitude to the women whose shoulders upon which I stand. I humbly stand, and I hope to uncover their voice and their place in history. And I love the idea of the Ngoma series as drums. You know, they sound the alarm, they bring attention, and they have a very significant place, in the history of people of African descent. So let's get started. I begin with this quote from Ida E. Lewis. Ida E. Lewis was a journalist. She worked for Essence magazine, a Black woman journalist. And so she provided this description, this discussion of African American women. And from this, I think that it helps to capture the spirit of which this conversation will be today. And so I'm just going to read for emphasis, although I know everyone could read. And she says that perseverance is the word that best describes the Black woman. It is a clue to what either always was or later became her basic nature. In every circumstance, she displayed a spirit of survival. And the practicalities of that appear to have become an integral part of the very person and personality of the Black woman herself. Even during periods of bleakest despair, racked by the image of grinning oppressions sitting on the bones of her children, the Black woman journeyed through the hells of America, spirited and determined that one day she, with her people, would embrace the moments of freedom and empowerment, my emphasis and add. And so Black women historically, and I should say that when I mention Black women, when I use the term Black woman, it is inclusive of women across the African diaspora. I use Black women as a holistic and inclusive term. African women on the continent, African women in the Caribbean, African women in Europe, African women in the North and South America. I use it as a term to try to bring us all together. And so that is in the spirit in which I say Black women. So Black women's everyday victories really speaks to their sense of survival. Their sense of survival is something that I believe historically from the beginning, Black women have used to navigate and maneuver through our society. Pre-enslavement, you look at the work and the organization of Black women on the continent, you see that they played leadership roles, that they were integral to the decision-making in their various societies. We know that Black women, when they enter the room, they bring a community with them, not just by being mothers, but by a history of being invested in more than themselves. And I always think of, the term I am because we are, and we are because I am. And that really speaks to when a Black woman enters a space that she brings not just herself, but she also brings her people with her. And so the everyday victories that I'm speaking about are just everyday folks like you and I. And I mean that in a highly respectful way, but I always try to move away from these extraordinary ideas of, this extraordinary Michelle Obama or this extraordinary Oprah Winfrey, and nothing against those sisters. I think that they are phenomenal, but I think they are just as phenomenal as the Black women whose names we don't know, right? The church mother, your neighbor, Auntie Jane, and Miss Loretta, they too are extraordinary Black women. And what makes them extraordinary is this sense of survival that is not just them, right? But it's also those that they bring with them, those that they seek to assist in surviving and surviving better than they survive. You know, when you think about Black women, and you, of course, you think about the United States, the feminist movement, and you know, there are differences in the focus of what Black women search for, and so it wasn't necessarily the right to work, because Black women always worked. It wasn't you know, I want to work, but how much work I have to do, where I have to work, when I have to work, who I'm working for and or with. The creativity of the work. And so when it comes to survival, work was always a part of it, paid and unpaid work, formal and informal work. And that was a part of that survival, that push to survive for themselves, the survival of their loved ones, and the survival of their community. There is a woman extraordinaire, Maria Stewart, at the turn of in the late 1800s, early 1900s. She was a writer and an orator, and she championed that the utility, the functionality, the purpose of Black women's relationships with each other provides them a community of activism. So just by coming together on a cause, Black women create a community of activism that allows them to engage in dialogue. It allows them to be self-determined and self-defined. It allows them to move themselves and their communities forward. And that is how I'm using activism, right? Activism, this practice that emphasizes vigorous action for change, activism, recognizing that something needs to occur and having the courage to do that which needs to occur. And so their everyday victories is in their coming together as a community, it is in their work, and it is in their conversations with one another. And so I ground this, and I'm kind of giving just a backdrop, and then I'm hoping that we can engage in conversation. But I ground this in the late Katie G. Cannon's work. I first met Dr. Cannon when I was at Temple. She was one of the first female Episcopalians. She was well-versed, and she wrote about Black womanist ethics, her term, which I believe her life also espoused. And in her work, Black womanist ethics, that came out in 1988, she says that there are three moral codes, three moral characteristics that Black women have, and that they espouse, and that it assists them to persist in their lives. Now, I've added that these three characteristics of Black womanist ethics lends itself to their activism. And that activism is evident in their everyday victories. And so these three characteristics of invisible dignity, unshouted courage, and quiet grace. Invisible dignity that really speaks to that Black women in particular, and this is being grounded in the United States in particular, North America, it really could apply to Black women throughout the diaspora, that their dignity was invisible. We know that there are these negative tropes of Black women as licentious, as uneducated, as either super strong and non-human, that they are, Zora Neale Hurston called Black women the mules of the world, that they can do anything, that they emasculate men, right? That they don't have any dignity or grace about them. And so that this invisible dignity, though, can be turned around, right? Can be turned around in a way that it presents Black women that we see their dignity. When you think about the National Association of Colored Women. The National Association of Colored Women organized in 1896 officially. A couple of years before that, Black women from across the country came together and realized in defense of themselves that they had to stand up for their morality and worth. A white male journalist, Jacks, he wrote that Black women were immoral and that there needed to be a rein on them and that we could not trust Black women. And so these women, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Mariah Stewart, Josephine Pierre Ruffin, Mary Church Terrell, came together in defense of themselves and created the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs in 1896. And so they came together, unshouted courage. They didn't make a lot of hoopla. They came together in DC. They organized, they debated, interestingly, about what they should call themselves. But they came up with the National Association of Colored Women's Club. So dignified, courageous, with grace to fight against this injustice that was presented. And so using Katie Cannon's Black Womanist Ethics, I want you to remember those three concepts, right? Invisible dignity, unshouted courage, and quiet grace. And I say that these three characteristics really speak to the everyday victories of Black women's activism. And so I think the best way to help prove my point, if you will, is just to provide you with some examples, and that this activism is found in how they live, how they survive, who and what they fight, how they thrive in spite of, and how in the midst of all this, they share and care for their community. And so you may be familiar with these three women, but the first woman, excuse me, is Harriet Tubman. Not many people know about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a bad mama, shut your mouth, right? She was a woman who took no tea for the fever, as they say. She was enslaved, and she knew that that was wrong and that that was not going to be her plight. And so she took what she could, and she left Baltimore, Maryland. And it's always interesting because when folks talk about Harriet Tubman, they think that she may be where I am. I am in the deep South, in Virginia. It's deep for me. But she was still below that Mason-Dixon line in Baltimore, Maryland. And she knew that she could not live that life in bondage. But not just that she came back to help and to bring others out of that bondage. And so it's, people talk about Harriet Tubman in terms of how she carried a gun. They talked about how, what she would say. They've called her the Black Moses. But for me, what stands out about Harriet Tubman is that one simple concept, that she was a human being, and that she deserved to be free, and that her freedom was based on if others would also be free. She recognized that concept, that she could only be free as those who were still enslaved. And so that activism, that courage, that dignity, that grace, to me, are examples of Black women's everyday victories. Now, there were others that we just don't know about. There were many people who escaped to freedom that we may not know their name, but they held on to that same concept because they knew that they could only be as free as those who were still in bondage. In the middle is one of my sheroes, Ida B. Wells Barnett. Ida B. Wells Barnett was a journalist. I was initially trained as a journalist, and so I was drawn to this Black woman who, just to give you some insight, came from humble means, just like Harriet Tubman. She was born right at the cusp of the Emancipation Proclamation. She lost both her parents to the yellow fever epidemic. She helped to raise her siblings. She traveled. She was among the first to fight against segregation on public transportation and actually sued the railroad system because they threw her off. She did not want to sit in the Negro car because they were smoking, and she didn't want to sit in the smoke. And so she wanted to sit in another car and paid for that other car. but they kicked her off. She sued, she won, but then it was appealed and rescinded. But Ida B. Wells Barnett, she fought against injustices. She was an anti-lynching crusader. She recognized that the basic premise that pushed and encouraged the lynching of Black men, women, and children were not about Black men's uncontrollable sexual desires for white women, but instead, it really spoke to economic freedom and empowerment. And that her two friends, Thomas Moss, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank, Thomas Moss, but they held the People's Grocery Store. When they were lynched, she realized they were lynched because they were taking away from their grocery store was so successful in that community. And so because of the economic, the self-determination, the self-sufficiency, that Black people were being lynched. Also, Ida B. Wells Barnett, pivotal, participated in the beginnings of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. She was a founding member of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. She was a journalist. She was the type of journalist, I'll give you one example, one of my favorites, and I've shared this others, is that when she was printing her newspaper, and she knew that many Black folks, were not literate. And when she was printing her newspaper, she realized that in the certain areas, they would not print her newspaper because she spoke against those injustices. And that oftentimes when Black folks would go, they would go by the newspaper, and then they would have the person in the community who could read would read the newspaper to them. And when she realized that they were not selling her newspaper, she printed it on pink paper. So that way you didn't have to know how to read, but you would look for the pink newspaper, and then you can get the information that she was sharing with the community. Her newspaper was, her office building was burned down, but she just persisted. She was a persistent woman. When she married, she had 4 children. She would bring her 4 children with her. She became active in politics in Chicago. And they also have the Ida B. Wells homes named after her as well. So she's just another example of the persistence and tenacity and the activism, quiet grace, invisible dignity, and unshouted courage of Black women in our time. And the last woman, I just want to use an example. I don't know if anybody knows who she is. If you know who she is, maybe if you can, just put it in the chat for me. Does anyone know who the last woman is on the right? I'll give you about 30 seconds if anyone knows who she is. I don't see the chat, but I'm gonna go ahead and tell you. So that is Joanne Robinson. Now, Joanne Robinson was a professor. She was active in Montgomery, Alabama. She was educated and she taught at the University of Alabama. Now, Joanne Robinson was a member of the Women's Political Council. She taught at Alabama State College. And she had an experience in Montgomery in the 40s with segregation on their public transportation system. And she wanted to boycott, and they were told no. And then fast forward, you have Claudette Colvin, and then you have Rosa Parks, and you have the formation of the Montgomery Improvement Association. And it is because of Joanne Robinson's tenacity and her strategic organizational skills that they were able. Did you ever wonder, how were they able, Rosa Parks arrested on a Friday and they boycott on a Monday? How do you organize like that in over a weekend? And it's because of Joanne Robinson and the Women's Political Council, that they already had a plan in place to boycott. She had organized with the taxis. She had made plans with the various workers throughout their community so that they would be ready to effectively boycott. And we know the history that occurred afterwards. And so these are just 3 women who I think provide us with examples of this activism that is found. So I thought I would be remiss if I did not also share, though, 3 women from Pennsylvania. And so these 3 women also, they were club women, and they speak to the activism, the community centeredness of survival, and the everyday victories. And so in the cap and gown is Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander. So she was a lawyer from Philadelphia. She was a member of the Philadelphia Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. She used her role as a trained attorney to assist in lawsuits, to assist in constitutional rights being restored and protected of those in the community at that time. Then you have Ruth Bennett. I don't know if you're familiar, Ruth Bennett from Chester, Pennsylvania. Ruth Bennett, she was a social worker. She founded the Bennett Homes for Girls. She used her insight and skill, her opportunities to empower others. And what you'll find that the thread of these Black women is that all of them use whatever their skill was. If they were attorney, if they were a social worker, if they were a journalist, if they were a teacher, whatever their profession, they used that for good. It was undergirded with a collective mindset that they knew that their work, the direct impact of their work, would really serve as an activist tool to emancipate their communities. And then this woman, Julia Rustin, is the grandmother of Bayard Rustin. And many folks, he was raised by his grandmother. And I would say that it was his grandmother that really instituted the civil rights mindedness that we find in the work of Bayard T. Rustin as well. And she also was from Pennsylvania. And so these 3 women in the early 20th century, we still feel the impact of the work that they did. And to me, those are the everyday victories. And so I'm wrapping up, and I just want to bring it to contemporary times. And so I gave you these historical figures from the late 1800s, the progressive era, and even the civil rights movement. But these Black women's activism can be seen today in some of these, just some of these examples. And they're really not, I want you to think about, because we all know a Black woman whose work has impacted their local community, right? I could think about my own grandmother, God bless her memory, Mary Thomas, the work that she did. She worked at an institutional home for those with mental disabilities and challenges. And the work that she did, she used that to support her church. She was very, very active in her church. She encouraged her children to go to school, to do better. She encouraged her grandchildren to go to school, to do better. And so that the work that she did would impact others and have a generational impact. And so I have these 3 concepts. My colleague, I believe I saw her earlier, Dr. Ernestine Duncan and I, we have written an article on Black activist mothering. And really, I would say a prime example of Black activist mothering would be Mamie Till, Emmett Till's mother. A horrific story of a young boy going to visit and being lied on and murdered as a result of that. And his mother, Mamie Till, in her distress, her grief, her mourning, she realized that if she to make an impact so that his life would not be in vain, to show the torture and the disfiguration of his face, to have that be seen publicly, to bring it home that this is wrong. Look at what they're doing to our children. And as a result, and she continued to lobby and fight against not just lynching, but other atrocities against Black lives, which brings us to this Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement began by 3 women, right? 3 women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, came together in response to Trayvon Martin's murderer being acquitted. They felt they were drawn to say that Black lives matter. And I'm not going to discuss about all lives because everyone's lives matter. But when Black lives don't seem to matter and they are easily dismissed and discarded, these Black women came together and began this movement, right? To actualize and to formalize something that many of us who are trying to do the work know that Black lives matter, and to push them to the forefront. And even the Me Too movement started by Tarana Burke against sexual assault and against rape culture. And when you think about the history of how Black women have been treated and disrespected, to these tropes of, being over-sexualized. When you think about, Hottentot and how her physical appearance was abused and objectified. And then you have Tarana Burke in 2006, who starts this Me Too movement to say that, yes, me too, Black women, I too am important and I should be respected and not sexualized. And so Black women's everyday victories continue today through the work that they do formally and informally, locally, national, regionally. And so I want us, when we think about Black women, I would throw out there to you to think about your own life and what's important to you, and how what's important to you is probably important to someone else as well. And that collectively we can do so much more than we can in our extremely individualized society today. And so I want to go back. I realized I just wanted to mention the names of some of these mothers. I said Mamie Till as one, but thinking about Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon Martin's mother, and Gwen Carr, Eric Garner's mother, and Valerie Bell, Sean Bell's mother, and Sandra Bland's mother. These mothers now, again, sadly, going through the same thing that Mamie Till went through. But in order for change to occur, and history repeats itself, my grandmother said, history repeats itself until it gets it, right? Until you get it. For us, it is possible. And we have the tools and resources to engage in these everyday victories, so that we have the courage through invisible dignity, unshouted courage, and quiet grace to make a change the way that these women have. These vigorous, active, persistent, tenacity-driven Black women. So this is just a selected bibliography, and I'll share it with Dr. Cooper. That is what I have to start our conversation today.
First, I'm just going to unmute to just give you a round of applause, and others can do whatever you need to do.
Awesome.
I said at the beginning of the presentation that we are in fact fortunate to be able to do this, on Zoom. But I do miss what we would be doing as people in general and African people in specific. I was calling out and saying, you go, and you're right on point. We do want to open it up for question and answer. Some have put a couple questions in the chat. One thing I do want to mention that we launched in African and African American Studies minor, the first course on Black women, African-American women that is being taught as we speak by Dr. Lola Ames. So I just wanted to mention that we did that. And quickly, Dr. Miller, I realized that even if we had you do every single Ngoma, all 6 of them, it still wouldn't be enough, and it still wouldn't be enough time. So I thank you for what you were able to do in the little bit of time that you had that really educated our audience and whetted my palate as well. I'm going to go back up to a couple questions. Others, feel free to put them in the chat. I will, if I see your hand raised, kind of go between the chat and live hands. We ask that people kind of be direct and provide their question if that's possible. Love that phrase. My grandmothers would say that no tea for the fever. Professor Harden, the fight with the Black community seems to be the loss of collectivism, which goes against the social norm of individualism that is being pushed. How do we increase working together towards a common cause that will benefit us all and push our group forward in this society? So I'll pitch that question to you, Dr. Miller.
If I knew, I would tell you. But I think that's why I think I'm so drawn to history. I love history because I think that the answers are there. And so, looking to see how finding these causes, I think that there's so much, it's so expansive. We're so multi-talented that if a group of us who are interested in shifting the narrative on family or on education or social issues, I think what is interesting, and I go back to the National Association of Colored Women's Club, the NACW, they focused on life skills. So it was about having clean water. We're still dealing with that today. It was about having wellness and good health and not living in a food desert and having access to fresh foods. Unfortunately, we're going through those same issues today. And they came together in their communities to find ways to pool their resources. And so there is a tension. I think there's a pull because the popular society has a very individualistic goal. And so going back to the roots of Africanism, which is collective, the roots to even, I'll go back, I'm so years old, and growing up, the community, we know people everywhere. In the United States, we tend to live segregated. And so these communities support each other, but we're even moving away from that. So I don't have the answer, but I do think that there are models and paradigms already in place that were successful that we could pick up.
Excellent. I'll go to the next question. I think it comes from Camille West in the chat. What are your suggestions on breaking the negative stereotypes about Black women at PWIs? I think most of us know predominantly white institutions. How do we get our white counterparts interested in learning about Black women and Black culture?
So first, I think it starts at home. So I think we ourselves, the Black community, have to stop believing the tropes and the stereotypes. We have to stop pushing them. And then to try to engage in these difficult conversations. It made me think about, like, during the suffragist movement and the conversations that Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell had with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others, how they had to pull each other aside and have these one-on-one conversations, these truthful conversations about priorities and about mutual respect. And I think it goes down to respecting womanhood in general, and then moving away from, because white women have tropes on them, being pushed on that pedestal, I think is one of the worst things that it could have done. And everybody, like they used to say, drank the Kool-Aid and now has a sugar rush because they see white women as this delicate, untouchable, and then see Black women not as women. And so coming together with an understanding of what womanhood is in all its complexities, and then trying to move forward.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll go to the next question. I believe it's from Dr. Erica Dawkins. Do you feel like the narrative qualitative experience of Black women is more impactful and can be elevated on the research academic level?
Definitely so. Definitely so. I applaud the National Association of Black Women Historians and the work that they do. You know, Darlene Clark Hine, and if I start naming, I'm not going to remember, but it's so many of them who really have pushed to expose the work of Black women. I think the more and more we uncover, it just doesn't glean insight to Black women, it also gleans insight to the Black community as a whole. And so simply, yes.
Excellent. And it's funny, we should have pointed this out. So thank you for this comment or question. Dr. Hall says, this is a great conversation and we should make sure we post or discuss the debut of The Woman King, the movie, which our timing is impeccable here, and how impactful we have been in society. I don't know, Dr. Miller, if you've seen it yet or if you have any comments.
I actually, my youngest daughter and I went to see it yesterday. And we left and we were like, we were ready. And, you know, I'm not even going to talk about, you know, critics might talk about historical accuracies or whatever, but I will say, which was accurate and 100% on point, is that when Black women come together and make up their mind, they are successful, they are strategic, they are impactful. And as the movie showed, it doesn't just benefit them, it benefits the entire society.
Excellent. Some of my students are saying wonderful. They have to get to another class, which I understand. And if you're my students and you have to go, we get it. We can talk about how you upload it as an assignment. I got some assignment questions that I'll take later, but thank you. Some are saying they have to leave now, which we know. Another question or comment, perhaps it is time to become unified, working together, putting aside petty differences and moving forward together. Let me add to that question. I am of the opinion, and I realize I'm a Black male, that oftentimes Black women are stereotyped as these features, when in fact, there's even greater history of how Black women have pulled together always historically and still do. Would you talk about that?
Yes, I think that if you look at, I think the progressive era provides us with a lot of insight because you have the formulation of many Black women organizations. And so that they organized on these particular issues, right? So even before we had, you think about Ruth Bennett right there in Chester as a social worker and the work that she did in the neighborhood, how she was able to formally develop that into her profession and work with other Black women and across racial lines to address particular issues. And so and you look at your Greek lettered organizations, your sororities, there are many civic and social organizations that Black women, when they come together, they address a particular issue. So again, I feel like I'm saying the same thing, but I really want to emphasize that the models are there for us to pick up the mantle, so to speak, and to focus, because there's so many issues that there's a space for all of us to meaningfully contribute and make change.
Great. Derek asks, as a Black man, how can I be an effective and positive ally to Black women? I'll throw in, like the late great Frederick Douglass was, but yes, how as a Black man might he?
I would say, one, to be true to oneself first, and then to provide support. I think collectively, everyone is needed in order. So it's not a Black woman situation or a Black man situation, but it is Black people as a whole, and to provide support through, one, basic respect, you know, a mutual consideration, and then all hands on deck. You know, many hands make light work. And so I think that speaks to the role that Black men and women can come together.
Yeah, I want to just add a question. How can Black men help break the yoke of patriarchy and its both historical European manifestations and the Black one. And I've read actually new Dr. Cannon. She talked about it specifically in the Black church.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one is recognizing that there's a participation, right? So when you participate and benefit from a system, it's often difficult to break away from that system because it's a release of power. And we know, power does not concede itself. It has to be taken. I think Audre Lorde said something about that. So in terms of one, recognizing the role that patriarchy has and how it dehumanizes, and then also looking for ways to not participate. And that's difficult because patriarchy is so embedded in our society on so many levels. And women, I'll admit, I play into patriarchy as well in many instances because it's so ingrained in our society. And so to be consciously aware of that and to be open that if, someone says, excuse me, but that was, patriarchal, that was sexist, that was oppressive, to be receptive to one, hear, acknowledge, and then work to change.
Excellent. Question comes from Corinne. Sorry, I can't see your last name. I definitely see a lot of divide in our community, and I would love to see efforts to fix this divide, but I'm just not sure how we go about that change.
I'm not either, Corinne. But I will say that I do think that we should never dismiss the power that we each hold, and that we can bring someone along. You can, whether it's a sibling or a child or a parent or a friend, a fellow colleague, we can, there's something that brings us together, right? There's always something that a couple of us are impassioned about. And I think that that's where we can start finding a common ground and then building from that common ground.
Great. Angie Wilson says, what changes have you made being Black women and now more aware of these issues? So I don't know if you want to add, you've said some of it, but anything you want to add?
What changes have I?
And you said how you unintentionally feed into patriarchy and you're working on it yourself. You did point that out early on.
Right. And I think, and I'll share, I am a mother of 2 Black young women. And so for me and how I engage with them, how I support them, how I check and correct them, speaks to, I feel, my role as a mother of Black children, to ensure that they're aware and that they are empowered. I really push for my daughters to read and learn and know their history, to know their rights, to be politically and socially engaged. And then personally, I think that faith plays a role as well.
Great. Daniel asks, how can we move away from the Eurocentric dominance for women in appearance, lifestyle, etc. today? I'm going to throw in, and the popular term is Karens, but there have always been Karens in our history trying to harm us. How can we move away from the European dominance for women in appearance, lifestyle today, and as it's manifested in this generation of Karens as well?
I feel like a broken record, but I really think it's important to know our history. I'll say that, the complexity and diversity of, I'll just speak to Black women and how they express themselves. If you look in ancient African history, Black women have threaded their hair, they have elongated. This is before any European influence, that Black women, they would use the mud and henna to color their hair. They were extremely, extremely creative and diverse in how they express their aesthetic selves. And so I will say that the African aesthetic really lends itself in functionality. Is not just in, the kind of looking upon, beholding the beauty, but how one expresses oneself. And so first, I would say that we have to stop thinking that there is only one way to be Black or African-centered. And so once we embrace that, I think that it's important for us to allow for that diversity and expression, and to move away from the European aesthetic of looking at, how someone presents themselves, that it's for the others to look at, but instead it's an expression of themselves.
Yeah, and not to put words in your mouth or to get you in trouble, but the aesthetics even found in religion. You got to go back to Kemet and see Black women as goddesses and deity, from Ma'at to the walls of the pyramids. Even if you don't get there, I've never been there physically, but I've seen images, been to hundreds of lectures, and I know you studied it even more than I have. Unless you see yourself in the beginnings of creation and understand your greatness, almost from conception, you're taught that you didn't have a role, when in fact you birthed it through your wombs collectively. So unity among Black women, people leave none behind. That was Cassandra. We asked that one. Thank you for your time and expertise and labor, Dr. Miller. Really glad to have the opportunity to participate. That was Dr. Erica. Dr. Hershey says, Dr. Miller, could you talk more about your work with Dr. Duncan on Black activist mothering, and where can we read more? And then we maybe have time for one more question after that.
Well, Dr. Duncan is here. Dr. Duncan, you want to wave? It is something that she and I both, as Black mothers of girls, we've always found interesting, and we've really taken to heart, how could our privilege and access, how could we use that to engage academically in terms of trying to create change or a shift and or awareness to the situation. And so we had an opportunity to participate in a journal, which for some reason I'm drawing a blank on the name of the journal. Dr. Duncan, if you remember, please share. And so it was in an article on Black activist mothering, and looking at how being a Black mother to a certain extent is a courageous undertaking. And that to raise children in a society that views Black life as lesser than, that it really is a statement. And so even when you go back to during enslavement in the United States and the abuse, the rape of Black women using their bodies as cattle to produce enslaved. And what does that mean to her psyche, knowing that she is birthing someone who will be devalued and abused? And so coming from that historical, and Dr. Duncan is a psychologist, this historical, psychological, integrated perspective really lent us to think about Black activists mothering. We are pained, I wish I could think of a stronger word, but pained at the abuse and misuse and the killing and murdering of Black humanity. And so we see Black activists mothering as a way to further the discussion on Black lives and how they matter.
Excellent, excellent. I want to thank you. Everyone can unmute if you care to give a round of applause and ashes and whatever else you need to do. We want to thank you. We will give us about 24, 48 hours, and we will post vis-a-vis a YouTube link. We will also, we will follow up. I will follow up. We will follow up by reading yours and Dr. Duncan's work. My students will find it in the next 24, 48 hours as part of required reading in a future assignment. So I know they're going to read it, or I will fail you personally, and I'm being recorded. So we'll make sure they're going to read it and they're going to know. What's the best way for people to contact you or to reach you or to email you?
just put my email in the chat. Email is probably best. And you can always go to the NSU website as well. And I just thank everyone for listening. And I hope the dialogue can continue.
Excellent. Dr. Wyse, looks like you unmuted.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you. This was great. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, phenomenal women, phenomenal presentation. We thank you so much for your time, and we will follow up with you by email. Clearly the right way to begin our series. Thank you so much. Asante Sana.
Asante Sana, thank you.
Everybody have a good rest of the day. Get to class, get to work, get to your next meeting. Third Monday of the month, you can join our email list. Stick your name and information in the chat if you're not on our email list or Ngoma list, and we'll update you. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Glad I got out of my meeting.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. It was awesome. So
thank you for coming.
have a great day.
All right, take care. Take care, everybody. I'm pausing just for someone that wants to add it in the chat, because you know I can capture it and we'll have it before I dash to my next meeting that has already started, but I'll just run to the room. And again, thank everybody. Some of you were with us last year when we launched. Oh, Eric, my pleasure. I'm glad you're able to join. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm substituting class here in Harrisburg, so just got a little piece of it. God bless you.
Oh, great. And it'll be on, or if you haven't joined us, make sure you put your email in the chat, because it's recorded, and we'll have it on a YouTube link, and everybody will be able to see whatever they missed.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Be well.
Be well, sir. Let me see.
All right. Looks like we're at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to shut this down. I was just giving a little bit more time because I can capture the comments in the chat. And then if you are putting your email list in there, I will go back through and add you to our mailing of a few hundred now on the Ngoma list. And we send them out reminders and so on, and who our speakers are. Take care, everybody. Thanks for coming for the launch. And we look forward to seeing you on the third Monday next month, where we already have our speaker lined up. She is phenomenal. I'll send you more tidbits about her to whet your palate, but she's phenomenal as well. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Excellent. So I just wanted to check in, see if you got everything that you need.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Everything went well. Folks signed in. I just had one gentleman scratching his flute over there.